Evening, guys. So recently I saw a Tumblr post that was about Jacqueline Wilson books being like traumatizing, and I was like, what the hell are you on about? I loved the Jacqueline Wilson books as a kid. They were not traumatic at all. You're crazy. So I looked in the comments of the post, and lo and behold, there were many similar comments talking about how Jacqueline Wilson had low-key traumatized them as well. So I did a little digging, and it turns out, yeah, these books were kind of low-key traumatizing, guys. I was thinking about the best place to start in this nostalgia trip that I'm about to take, reading all of my old Jacqueline Wilson favourites. Of course, Jacqueline Wilson is most well known for TRACY Beaker, thanks to, the TV show. TRACY was relatable to like naughty kids, I know, and I never really related to that. I wasn't a naughty kid, but I did find TRACY relatable in other ways. Like, she was a bit of a tomboy, and I know that other Jacqueline Wilson characters like to do each other's hair and makeup and stuff, and I was never bothered with things like that as a child. TRACY made friends with boys a lot. She didn't really make friends easily with girls, and she got picked on by girls a lot in the books, and that was something I related to as well. So basically I spent my entire weekend reading the entire TRACY Beaker series, including the books that have come out since I stopped reading Jacqueline Wilson, started thinking I was a bit too old for her. Now here we are, and I'm going to tell you about it. We begin with the story of TRACY Beaker, where it all started. I think it's interesting that when we were kids, we viewed TRACY as this really outrageous and naughty kid who, like, we wish we had the balls to be like. But now, reading this story as an adult, I understand her behaviour. Like, she lies and acts out to get attention, and then when things don't go her way and she doesn't maybe get the special treatment that every child kind of deserves, right, and that every child can't get when they're in the foster care system like TRACY is, then she gets angry. Like, the angriness was funny when we were younger, but now it's just sad. There was like the undertone of sadness when you were younger and you did understand that TRACY was not in a good situation, but like, it's so much darker to read this as an adult, knowing all of the implications that you do. So for anyone who doesn't know, basically the story of TRACY Beaker follows TRACY. She lives in a place she calls the dumping ground, which is like a foster home. The parents do come and visit the kids, but it's rare, and like a few of them move on, have like other families, and just leave one of their children in this place. And I think that's pretty awful. And I don't think that's a hot take. I think it's really interesting to see these problem children and like be an adult that has gone through things now. Like, as a kid reading this, you were safe in your room, in your house, with your nuclear family or whatever, and things hadn't happened to you, yes, but now as an adult, having experience of bad things happening to you and the way that this can make you react to situations, it's interesting basically to relate to problem children as a 25-year-old woman, is what I'm trying to say. I'm a problem child. I'm not afraid to admit it. The next book chronologically is Starring, but the one that came out first was The Dir Game. I'm going to do it in the order that I read them and talk about The Dir Game first. In The Dir Game, TRACY has been fostered by this woman called Cam, but she's not really satisfied with the care that she's getting. Like, she wants Cam to like buy her stuff all the time because that's how TRACY like gauges affection. So she's kind of acting out a little bit. She's going to this new school that Cam's insisting she goes to, but she doesn't like it, so she's skipping, and she ends up going to this house where these other two boys are skipping school, and hijinks ensue. One of the guys is Alex, and this is something that I do not remember from my childhood, but apparently Alex skips school because the other guys make fun of him because he has a small dick. And then I'm like, excuse me, you're all like in primary school, right? Like, none of you have a big dick. I'm just telling you straight, boys. It's so weird to read that and to like think that I just read over it when I was a child and was like, oh yeah, that's fine. That's a fine thing to do. And there's no way that I could have possibly not understood it either and just thought it was because he was scrawny or whatever, because they make it pretty obvious. There are cucumber references. We see the kids' opinions on their parents, and they always seem to idolise one parent over the other. Or like in TRACY's case, she only has the one parent, but like she idolises her mother, even though her mother is definitely not up to scratch, shall we say. There's this character, Football, who like he lives with his mum, and his mum is obviously like the authoritarian parent, whereas his dad comes and like takes him for fun trips every now and again, and so obviously he idolizes his dad, even though we as adults can see that his dad is like pretty useless. Another thing about Alex is he like accidentally jumps out of a window and like they think he's dead for a minute. And when I was asking my friends about Jacqueline Wilson and stuff, one person did say that there was an alarming amount of people jumping out of windows in those books. And I did recall one book where there was a person jumping out of a window. The Durr Game was not it. So it'll be interesting to see how many more people jump out of windows through the course of this whole thing. I think the main focus of the Durr Game really is the fact that we get to see Tracy's mum in this, and like Tracy bigs up her mum a lot. Like a lot of the stuff we know is lies. Like even as a kid we knew that her mum probably wasn't this famous Hollywood actress, and that's why she couldn't take care of her kid, because obviously a famous Hollywood actress would have a nanny, duh. It's interesting to see Tracy's mum through like an adult perspective, because when I was a kid I was just like mad at her because she wasn't like a proper mum to Tracy, and like obviously like I love Tracy, she's a kid like me, I understand that kids should have a loving home and a parent who cares about them, and like her mum like comes and looks after her for a couple of weeks in her house, and then she ends up going out drinking and she brings some guy back because she just completely forgets that her child is there, and it's like a really sad moment. As a kid I was like angry at Tracy's mum, but now as an adult it's like I feel sad for her, because you can tell through the narrative, like she buys Tracy all these presents because she wants Tracy to be like grateful to her and look up to her as this like great mom, but the presents aren't really suited to who Tracy is as a person, and some of them are, you know, suited for like a much younger kid, because that's the last time Tracy's mum saw her, and you just kind of get to understand that she's just this sad woman who maybe relies on men a little bit too much and just doesn't know how to look after a young child. She doesn't know how to relate to her. She just can't do it for whatever reason. The present scene was like a really like sad one for me, especially because obviously, like I said earlier, that's how Tracy gauges affection, and the fact that her mom has come back into her life and bought her all these like expensive chocolates and a china doll. At face value she sees that and she's like, oh, this is the affection that I have been deserving, like my mom clearly knows what I want. But like I said, the presents aren't suitable, and I think even Tracy herself comes to realise that although Cam maybe isn't like rich and isn't showering her in gifts all the time, the care that Cam gives her is a lot more adequate than the care that she receives from her mother. I'm going to talk about starring Tracy Beaker very briefly, because it's just about Tracy being in a school play, and it's, you know, it's an alright little read, but I couldn't help but notice that this having come out after the Durr Game but being set canonically before it, Tracy's a lot better behaved. Like there's no skipping school, and there's no asking for cigs like she does a few times in the first two books. She's a lot better behaved, and I can't help but think that this might be because it came out at a later date than the other two, or maybe, you know, it took place in the honeymoon period between her and Cam before she started acting up and stuff like we see in the Durr Game. I'll give Wilson the benefit of the doubt. So now we get into the books that I hadn't read before in my childhood, and I was actually really excited for this because these are told from the perspective of Tracy's child when Tracy's all grown up, and you know, I was excited to see how Tracy was doing, the same as everybody else probably was. I'm a little bit late to the party, but there you go. My mum, Tracy Beaker, Tracy meets one of the guys that she used to hang out with in that house from the Durr Game, and he's like grown up to be a famous footballer and like he's dead rich and stuff. They get into a relationship and they move in together and they're gonna get married, and her daughter Jess doesn't really like him, but she gets on with it because her mum's happy, and then she finds out that he's cheating on Tracy. We see a lot of the adults that we saw as children in the other Tracy Beaker novels, and it's interesting to see the hang-ups that they have from their childhood and how their childhoods have affected them. Like Tracy's got this weird thing with celebrating birthdays and having a cake to yourself and blowing out the candle, because she always had to share a birthday when she was in the foster home, and she always felt like that meant her wish wasn't like pure enough and it wasn't going to come true. Her boyfriend Sean was the guy who idolised his dad from before, And like apparently his house was always like messy and scruffy and stuff, and so he likes everything to be neat and just so. And that's why he's like not really suited to having Tracy and Jess and the dog that they bring into his house, because it's just, he's just not that type of like family person, I guess, or at least not with those two. I like that Jacqueline Wilson kind of did a Harry Potter here, where like Tracy Beaker was like this brash, outlandish, angry character, and her daughter isn't like that. She's like kind of shy and timid, and she doesn't like it when her mum kicks off at school at her teachers and stuff like that. Kind of like the Harry Potter cursed child angle, but it's done a lot better than that, I swear. The other novel featuring these two is the Beaker Girls. After this guy Sean cheats on Tracy, they move away to the seaside and they have a job in a antique shop called the Dumping Ground, coincidentally. Jess, Tracy's daughter, meets this girl down at the beach who she eventually finds out is homeless, and her and her mum end up rescuing her, and Cam, who's become like a proper foster mum to a load of girls, ends up fostering her, and it's all a big happy ending. This one feels a little bit like fan service, but it is really nice fluff, and there's also, you know, some issues explored through this girl homeless character Jordan, which is good because I'm gonna say it right now, I don't really like Jess, Tracy's daughter. I think it's explored through the text that she is a bit spoiled, because obviously Tracy wants to give her everything that she wants because she didn't have that when she was a child and blah blah blah, but that doesn't make me like her. The fact that it's lampshaded, you know, and I just think she's a little bit nosy and interfering and all that stuff. Her narrative got a little bit annoying for me sometimes, but you know, I kept reading because I wanted to know what was going on with Tracy and stuff like that, and I think she's just a really interesting character, isn't she? She does eventually end up with Peter, the guy she had to share a birthday with at the dumping ground, which I thought was really sweet, because obviously she used to be a little bit antagonistic to him when they were younger, but he obviously had a big crush on her and stuff. I did think it was a little bit funny that like all of the men who knew Tracy when she was younger apparently had a crush on her, but like also I can kind of see why. Like, is she a Mary Sue, or is she just a strong female character who men can't resist? There is one heavy topic delved into in this last book, and that is suicide. Basically the homeless girl Jordan attempts it a couple of times. She doesn't really go into like why she feels this way and stuff like that, but we can kind of insinuate, you know, she's not being looked after, she's got nowhere to go, she feels like nobody's looking for her, which is probably the most lonely feeling in the entire world. Like, I thought all the dark stuff was going to be in the books that Wilson released ages ago, but these weren't released that long ago, and there's kids trying to drown themselves in the ocean, so clearly she's still producing the same dark stuff that she always has. And that was the story of Tracy Beaker. I obviously don't have a lot to say about these nostalgic reads. They're very short and they're obviously children's books, so there isn't a lot to dive into, but that is not to say that they aren't masterful. Still think that Jacqueline Wilson is an amazing writer, and you know, I think that her work has this like timeless quality to it. Like, it's still a really easy read, and there's things about it that you won't understand until you go back and look at it with an adult perspective. So I feel like she may be writing primarily for children, but there's no reason why you couldn't go out and pick up her next book.